Hello, class. This is Jamion Lewis. I'm looking forward to speaking with you all about a dean's dilemma, selection of the students for their MBA program. The title listed in Module 6 assignments. It was listed under Harvard case study, so I thought this case would actually take place at Harvard and their admission team and how they selected or admitted their MBA students. But this actually took place in India, so that was quite a shocker. Let's get this thing started. So the overview is what I'm going to talk to you all about today. We're going to discuss the problem that Jane University was faced with. We're going to review the data that was sent by Dr. G, and we're also going to discuss my analysis, how I analyzed the data in Stata. I'm going to discuss some key issues that I noticed in the case and also provide some recommendations that I think will be beneficial for the admission staff at Jane University. Alright, so the problem, I believe his name was as Warren Iyer, the dean there at Jane University, at the business school there. Started out the case, he said that in a admissions committee meeting that the number of applicants for their MBA program had significantly increased for that year, and he later went on to say that the admission team had to ensure that they admit the right students, um, and really identify those individuals who would be employable after they complete the MBA program. Later in the case, there was a discussion about several reports that suggested that many students graduating from Indian B schools like Jane University were not employable. So that was a concern, and really brings us to the ultimate problem of this case, which was who to admit. So Dean Iyer went on in the article and considered himself as like the guard to gatekeep the admission process. He was noted as the guard, right, by thoroughly screening candidates and deciding which ones were admitted or rejected. So he was not really a single point of failure, but really the approval authority for admissions. It was also noted in the case that there wasn't a penalty if a non-placeable student was selected, but in turn, it would weigh heavily on the institution's reputation if a wrong pick was selected, or it could even contribute toward an increase in the number of unplaced students and possibly result in a reduction in the median salary. So, I noted that right off the bat. That was something that was mentioned a few times in the case, the median salary. So I definitely want to analyze the salaries information. So, like I said, getting back to the problem, the ultimate problem was who to admit in this case. They were faced with an increasing number of applicants. They're concerned for employability after graduation. The dean, like I said, he picked those individuals. So they want to ensure that they picked the right folks, didn't reject placeable candidates. And it was noted in the case that there was an absence of analytical reasoning, by using the dean. So we're going to discuss all of this stuff in more detail. So the data review. That Excel file that was sent, I believe there was 27 different columns of data, all I believe 5 or 6 were pertinent to the case that I used and really analyzed. The very most important thing for this case and analyzing the data was, of course, the tool that we used, Stata. So the very first thing that I did was import the data into Stata. There's my screenshot of my do file, the commands that I used, the use cell range, and you put in the cells that were actually used in the data set that was provided. First row clear was a lifesaver to keep the headers of the data, because I definitely did not want to change 27 column headers. That can definitely be time consuming. So this data makes that data review very easy for us. And so after reading the case and looking at what I thought would be key performance indicators based off of the case's information, I selected multiple variables out of the 27 to analyze and provide. I really thought of some concerns based off of the case study and tried to answer those or provide a solution for those concerns with my data analysis. So once I got the data input, I used the static command describe to see how many actual variables I had, and observations and the size. So you see all that there listed. And then I use the static command summarize to give me an overview of all of the data. Each variable, how many observations for each, the mean, standard deviation. So that's all provided there. See salary there at the very bottom. That was something that was mentioned heavily in the case study, so I definitely took a couple of looks at that. The very first thing I looked at was the median salary of all of the students, both placeable and non-placeable. And to do that, I used the static command summarize and then salary detail. And so that actually provided the percentiles in which the salary observations were listed. And there I noted that the median salary for all the students, both placeable and not, was $240,000. So that's a pretty good salary for India. I don't know what the cost of living is, but so that's a good median salary for all students. Read my notes here. Sorry about that. Right. So then I took another look at the data that was provided, and I ventured into the percentage of students that were placed. So that was a concern, or to address the ultimate problem, who to admit. Well, let's look at who was placed and who wasn't placed. And so, as you can see, I used the stata command tabulate for the placement variable, and there was 79.8%, so roughly 80% of individuals were placed. And the additional 20% or leftover 20% were not placed. And so out of 391 students, 312 were placed, 79 were not placed. So that really shows where they are, the selection committee, where they are as far as admitting students. And so then I wanted to provide a subset of data of individuals that were placed and keep my own data set for place individuals. And so I did that using the stata command, keep if placement b, so that was the variable that used the zeros and ones, right? And I chose greater than equals to 1, and that kept the only the data sets or data that had placed individuals, basically. And so this is a data set that only kept placed individuals. So as you can see from my screenshot, it deleted 79 observations, so those are the individuals that weren't placed. And then I exported that into an Excel file labeled as place and kept that in my Harvard case study folder that I have saved on my drive. And so that became a data set that was, I believe, to be valuable in this case study. And so what I did with that, I went and looked at the salary, right? So that was the most heavily mentioned thing in the case. Apologize for the noise. So I looked at the median salary of the individuals that were placed. So using that same stata command of summarize salary detail, which provided me that median there of $260,000. So if you remember back, the median salary of all students, both placed and not placed, was $240,000. So the median salary of the individuals who were placed was only $20,000 more. So not too significant, um, but if you'll notice that one percentile there, the lowest salary is $120,000. So uh, the likelihood of you going to Jane University, you get admitting, and you graduate, $120,000 coming out of the MBA. That's not too bad. All right, and so I noticed the column, and I'm sure the class can relate to this because there are multiple data sets that we looked at gender, and as you know, gender is it can be it can differentiate payment in some situations. So I'm sure we've all seen that. That's not fair, but I just want to look at this to see if there's a difference in pay based off of gender for the individuals that were placed. And so I took a look at the male there on the left using the state of command summarized salary with the detail, and if gender B less than 0. So I used the gender B column that had the zeros and ones, and then I got the mean of the salary for males, and the mean there was $284,000, roughly a little over. And then for female, I did the opposite command, using a 1 there, salary detail if gender B greater than 1, and I got the difference. So there was $253,000 was their mean salary, and so the difference was roughly $31,000 based off of just sex alone. So of individuals that were placed. So that was pretty significant. It's actually more significant than the individuals placed versus not placed median salary. So there's a greater difference in male versus female annual salary. I found that to be interesting. So I want to look at, I noticed the performance column or performance variable in the data set. So I want to analyze that and look at the performance of the individuals that were placed in the program. And overall, the maximum number of students got an average percentage of that 60 to 70% range during their MBA. So the individuals that were placed scored or averaged 60 to 7%. And so standing by itself, it's really not that significant, but of course, I'm going to use this data and compare it to the individuals that were not placed to provide detail. So I created a subset data set of the individuals that were not placed, just like I did for the individuals who were placed. And I used that stated command, keep if placement B, so the zero less than 0. So the zeros in the placement B column for that variable, and so there was 312 observations deleted, so it left us with those 79 individuals that were not placed, right, that 20%, and I exported that to Excel, and I titled it as not placed, put that in my Harvard case study folder, and there we go. I got to compare the MBA performance of individuals who were placed versus those who were not placed, and it's not too terribly significant, the difference, but you can tell that the individuals that were placed did perform slightly better than the individuals that were not placed. So the individuals that were not placed scored between the 50 to 60 range mark, whereas the individuals that were placed, the maximum amount of students scored in the 60 to 7 percentile range. So there's a difference there that you can clearly see in the graph provided. I'm so sorry, I'm battling a cold. All right, so then I also created a subset of data that discussed or fixed the students placed, um, and as well as took a form of entrance test before being admitted. So the case study discussed the three admission tests that were sought after for Indian Business School. So the GMAT, the MAT, um, and there was one proprietary Indian Business School um, review exam that I was not familiar with. And, they didn't use the GRE, which I guess that's not a big thing in India, but that would be something that I would recommend to Jain University if they want to incorporate that into their admission process or let that be a allowable standard, because I mean it suffices for a lot of the um, business colleges in the U.S. I know that the GMAT is the preferred, but I know a lot of MBA programs that admit with the GRE. I'm sure you all do as well. So that was interesting that they didn't include that. But nonetheless, I use the static command, keep if placement underscore B greater than 1. So that means that they were placed, right? And then static command, keep if S test greater than 1. That means that they took some form of admission entrance test, or yes, MBA or business practice admission test before being admitted to the school. Then I exported that data set into Excel. I wanted to see the difference of individuals that were placed and took some form of entrance exam versus the individuals that weren't placed. And I used this. So I found this tool interesting um, during our semester because it shows so much information in one chart. And so I use it to compare three different variables here: salary, the percent of MBA, so how well they did in the program, and then if they took an exam before being placed. And so looking at the chart, you can see that students who took an entrance exam before perform better during their MBA program. And this is so neat because it shows you that um, clearly. I mean, I really find that interesting and useful. I think the schools would benefit from that because it was mentioned that they didn't have that analytical review process for admissions, and so something along these lines, you know, really shows the pertinent factors for admitting students at Jain University. It shows how well that students do um, based on, so it doesn't show the scores that they actually made on the admission exam. So like the GMAT or the MAT, it doesn't show those scores. So I think that would be good info, to set a minimum standard for those exams in the admissions process. So that would definitely be beneficial. But just the data that was provided, it showed that the individuals that did take an exam, and it was noted that they took an exam, did better in the MBA program versus those who didn't. So, and then finally, I'll discuss my recommendations of this case. So, there was the ultimate concern was who to admit, and there was a possibility with their current selection method that they could reject a placeable candidate, and that they really just need much more analytical reasoning behind admitting candidates, right? So, and what I found from my data analysis and the review was that, the performance of the placed MBA students did do better than the individuals that were not placed. And also, students who took that entrance exam performed better during the MBA program. So those were two key takeaways. Um, but I definitely recommend using data to set admissions requirements. So if they can get those, if they can make that a part of the application process, those GMAT and MAT scores, looking at that data and how well the individuals performed, you could come up with a score that a minimally accepted score for the admissions program for the MBA program at Jane University. And then collecting data to address employability concerns. So that was something that wasn't listed in those 27 variables, or excuse me, 26 variables. Um, so I know that it was noted in the case, they wanted to pick individuals that were employable afterwards. So to kind of combat those reports that said, many students graduating from Indian B schools were not employable, I know they had the salary rates and which looked great. Um, but really to see employability, so maybe they could send out um, questionnaires at the 90-day mark after graduation, 180-day mark after graduation, so they can see how their alum are performing in the business environment. And then lastly, to employ analytical reasoning for selecting students, you can use the data that was provided in the data set right now with a few simple stated commands to formulate a selection methodology for the admissions program. I'm sure they would want something more robust, but they could definitely benefit. Jane University could look at other business schools' requirements and somewhat mirror off of them. But they can look at their previous data and how those individuals performed and come up with minimum standards for their admissions process. But overall, I really enjoyed this case. It was interesting. I'm very thankful that I got to take this class. It was challenging at times, extremely challenging at times, but we all made it. So I'm very fortunate for that. Dr. G is an outstanding instructor. Stata is incredibly helpful. When I first dealt with Stata a couple classes ago, I really didn't like it. I think it was because it kind of made me feel incompetent because I just wasn't proficient in it. I didn't know how to use it. But now, I believe it's my third class working with Stata. It's an outstanding tool, especially when you're working with large data sets. But even with medium-sized data sets like what was used in this case, you can get a lot of data analysis so quickly and so easily just by looking up some commands and using it to your benefit. So if y'all have any questions or concerns, or how I got, if you want me to discuss in more details as to how I got my data analysis numbers, please just feel free to email me. I'd love to discuss it. So thank you all for your time and have a great day.